Have you ever checked your phone hoping for a text from someone who suddenly disappeared, only to see they watched your story 3 minutes ago? What if the confusion isn't coming from mixed signals, but from entirely new relationship behaviors that didn't exist a decade ago? This is what ghosting, orbiting, micromance, surviving dating's latest trends is all about. Understanding the strange new language of modern romance and learning how to protect emotional well-being in a dating landscape that's become increasingly difficult to navigate. Here's what makes these trends so psychologically confusing. They're not just updated versions of old relationship problems, they're entirely new behaviors enabled by technology that create ambiguous situations the human brain wasn't designed to process. When someone disappears in the digital age, they don't actually disappear. They leave digital footprints that keep hope alive while offering nothing concrete. When romance happens now, it can exist in these tiny, fragmented moments that feel meaningful but lead nowhere. The rules have changed, but most people are still playing by old expectations, which creates constant confusion and hurt. So what exactly are these trends, and why are they everywhere? Start with ghosting, which has become so common it barely needs definition anymore. Ghosting is when someone being dated suddenly cuts all communication without explanation. No texts, calls, or replies, despite previous contact or dates. The person simply vanishes, usually to avoid discomfort, confrontation, or owning their actual feelings. This leaves the other person with no closure, no explanation, no ending to the story their brain was writing. And here's what makes ghosting particularly painful from a psychological perspective. It's experienced as rejection without explanation, which triggers intense rumination and self-blame. The mind keeps spinning. What did I do wrong? What could I have said differently? Did I misread everything? Researchers describe this as ambiguous loss, which can actually hurt more than a clear breakup because there's no story or closure to file away and move past. The brain keeps the file open, constantly searching for resolution that never comes. Now, people who ghost are often motivated by conflict avoidance, guilt, or not wanting to be seen as the bad person. They have immature conflict skills and rationalize that disappearing is kinder than leading someone on, but they're still avoiding directness and emotional responsibility. Some experts note that ghosting after 1 or 2 low-connection dates can be clumsy but relatively common and less harmful. But ghosting after emotional intimacy or a longer connection is far more damaging and signals low emotional maturity. Which brings up something even stranger than ghosting. Enter orbiting, which is when someone stops all direct communication, doesn't reply to texts, cancels, or never confirms plans, but stays present on social media. They watch stories, like posts, view profiles regularly. They're like a ghost that keeps circling digital life. They won't actually talk, but they also don't fully disappear. This behavior has a particularly confusing psychological effect. Think about what happens in the brain when someone who rejected connection keeps viewing stories. There's a question that loops endlessly. They saw my story. Do they still care? Are they thinking about me? Should I reach out? Therapists and dating coaches identify several motivations for orbiting. Sometimes it's curiosity, checking if the person moved on, who they're seeing now, whether they seem happy or sad. Sometimes it's ego boost combined with fear of missing out, wanting to feel like access still exists, even if there's zero intention of using it. Sometimes it's attachment anxiety, where anxious exes stalk social media for comfort without having to risk actual vulnerability by reaching out. And here's the mental health consequence that makes orbiting so insidious. It triggers obsessive checking behavior and creates what researchers call a high-low doom loop. There's a dopamine spike when the person watches or likes something. They're thinking about me, followed immediately by a cortisol crash when they never actually reach out. Hope, then disappointment. Hope, then disappointment. The nervous system gets stuck in this cycle, which keeps someone emotionally tethered to a person who's offering nothing real. Experts strongly recommend treating orbiting as data. This person wants access without effort. The healthy response is setting clear boundaries, muting or blocking if their digital presence keeps preventing moving forward. But there's a third trend that's newer and perhaps more subtle in how it operates. Micromance is a term being used in two different but related ways, and understanding both reveals something important about modern dating. In one definition, micromance describes brief, low-pressure micro-relationships or short-term situationships that are understood as temporary but emotionally intense. These look like intense texting for a few weeks, a handful of dates, big feelings developing quickly, and then it fades or gets ghosted. Sometimes both people understand it's temporary, but often one person quietly hopes it will turn into something more while the other is just enjoying the moment. In the other definition, micromance refers to small, meaningful romantic gestures, curated playlists, surprise coffee, favorite snacks, sending memes, ordering food when someone is stressed. Research from dating platforms shows that 86% of surveyed singles agree these micro-gestures feel like a modern way of expressing love. So the same word describes both mini-relationships that burn bright and disappear, and tiny gestures of care that might happen inside those mini-relationships or in established ones. Here's why this distinction matters. Healthy micromances are small gestures inside real committed relationships, the tiny acts that maintain connection and show ongoing care. Unhealthy micromances are mini-flings used to avoid deeper commitment, what some people call romance snacks instead of actual nourishment. The problem is that someone might be experiencing intense micro-gestures, personalized playlists, thoughtful small gifts, emotionally vulnerable late-night texts, and interpret these as signs of growing commitment. Meanwhile, the other person views these as just part of a temporary, low-stakes connection with a planned expiration date. The gestures create an illusion of depth that doesn't match the actual level of investment. And this reveals something important about why all these trends are so prevalent right now. Digital dating plus infinite access makes it incredibly easy to drop people with zero accountability through ghosting, to lurk on exes and old matches without engaging through orbiting, and to slide into mini-romances that stay undefined and end quickly through micromances and situationships. Psychologists describe ghosting and orbiting as avoidance strategies where people dodge awkward conversations, guilt, or vulnerability by silently withdrawing instead of communicating honestly. And algorithm-driven attention economies, with features like story views, likes, and scene receipts, gamify attention in ways that feed these behaviors. Orbiting feeds directly into the high-low doom loop, where people keep checking who saw their story, hoping it means something when it usually means nothing. Micro-gestures fit perfectly into busy, fragmented lives, just enough connection to feel something, not enough to demand real commitment or vulnerability. Technology hasn't made people more cruel. It's made avoidance, indecision, and ego-stroking behaviors that have always existed much faster, more visible, and easier to execute. There are several other related trends worth mentioning briefly because they all share a common theme. Breadcrumbing is sending occasional texts or likes to keep someone interested without any real commitment or follow-through. Submarining is when someone ghosts completely, then pops back up weeks or months later, acting like nothing happened. The slow fade is gradual reduction in contact instead of a hard ghost. Responses get shorter, delays get longer, until communication dies completely. And situationships are relationship-like dynamics with no clear label, boundaries, or commitment. stuck in the ambiguous space between hookup and relationship. All of these share one essential characteristic: access without accountability. The person wants to maintain some level of connection or optionality without taking responsibility for what that connection means or where it's going. And this creates enormous psychological strain for anyone on the receiving end who's trying to interpret signals, maintain hope, or understand what's actually happening. So how does someone survive these trends without becoming cynical or emotionally closed off? First, name the pattern without making it about personal worth. Understanding terms like ghosting, orbiting, and micromance helps externalize the behavior. The framework becomes, this is their avoidance strategy or attention-seeking behavior, not a verdict on my value as a person. That cognitive reframe alone can significantly reduce the self-blame and rumination that these behaviors typically trigger. Second, watch what people do, not what minds wish behaviors mean. Orbiting and micromances often create elaborate narratives internally. They watched my story, maybe they still care. They sent a thoughtful playlist, maybe they're getting serious. Therapists stress that story views and casual likes do not equal intention or genuine effort. If someone wanted real connection, they would communicate directly and make concrete plans. Digital breadcrumbs are not the same as actual investment, and interpreting them as signs of hope usually just extends suffering. Third, set clear digital boundaries to protect mental health. Healthy responses recommended by therapists include muting or removing people who keep orbiting and preventing moving forward. Don't chase ghosts. If someone repeatedly disappears or only offers micro-gestures with zero follow-through, disengage completely. The temporary discomfort of blocking or muting is far less damaging than months of obsessive checking and false hope. Fourth, communicate directly once, then let actions provide the answer. If there's confusion about a slow fade or orbiting situation, sending one direct message asking where things stand is reasonable. Something simple. Hey, I'm getting mixed signals. Are you interested in continuing to see each other, or should we move on? If they ignore that message or respond with vagueness and no concrete plan, that is the answer. Protect energy by stepping away rather than continuing to pursue someone who can't or won't communicate clearly. Fifth, recenter on secure attachment habits, because many of these trends hit hardest for people with anxious attachment. Those with anxious patterns tend to read meaning into every digital sign, struggle to let go of ambiguous situations, and stay hooked on intermittent reinforcement. Healing practices include building strong offline support through friends and therapy, practicing tolerating uncertainty without refreshing profiles or checking story views, and consciously seeking partners who show consistency instead of drama and intensity. The goal isn't to become guarded or cynical, but to develop enough internal security that ambiguous behavior gets recognized quickly and doesn't control emotional well-being. Here's the bigger picture that ties all of this together. Modern dating isn't necessarily more cruel than dating in previous generations. It's more visible and operates at much faster speed. Technology amplifies behaviors that have always existed: avoidance, indecision, keeping backup options, ego stroking without genuine interest. The difference is that ghosts now leave red receipts. Orbiters can watch from a distance without any effort, and micromances can exist entirely in text messages and streaming playlists without ever building real intimacy. What used to take weeks to become clear can now drag on for months in ambiguous digital limbo. And the psychological cost is real. After enough experiences of being ghosted, orbited, or caught in shallow micromances, many people shut down emotionally or keep everything surface level to avoid getting hurt, which ironically destroys the chance of the very connection being craved. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where expecting disappointment leads to investing less, which produces shallow outcomes, which proves the belief that real connection is impossible. Breaking this cycle requires conscious intention and clear boundaries. So here's what actually needs to happen to navigate these trends without losing hope or emotional openness. First, learn the terms to spot patterns faster. Understanding what ghosting, orbiting, and unhealthy micromances look like helps recognize them early, instead of spending months confused about what's happening. Pattern recognition protects against prolonged false hope. Second, stop negotiating with ghosts and orbiters. When someone demonstrates through behavior that they want access without accountability, believe that demonstration. Don't create explanations or give chances that weren't asked for. The kindest thing to do, both for them and for personal well-being, is to accept their behavior as the answer and redirect energy elsewhere. Third, invest time and emotion in people who show up in consistent, offline, and emotionally honest ways. Real connection requires vulnerability, clear communication, and follow-through. If someone can't or won't provide these basics, they're not actually available regardless of how many stories they watch or playlists they send. Fourth, build a full life outside of dating so that any single connection has appropriate weight rather than becoming everything. When someone has strong friendships, engaging hobbies, meaningful work, and solid self-relationship, dating becomes one part of life rather than the center of it. This makes it much easier to recognize and walk away from low-effort situations because well-being isn't dependent on them working out. Fifth, practice direct communication as a personal standard regardless of whether others reciprocate. Be the person who says clearly when interest exists, who asks direct questions when confused, who ends things honestly when they're not working. Not everyone will match this standard, but maintaining it anyway builds self-respect and attracts people who value the same kind of clarity. And finally, remember that these trends are symptoms of broader cultural problems: emotional illiteracy, avoidance of discomfort, technology addiction, fear of commitment, and vulnerability. Individual people aren't responsible for solving cultural problems, but individual choices about how to show up in dating do matter. Every person who refuses to ghost, who communicates directly, who doesn't orbit exes for ego boosts, who builds real relationships instead of collecting micro-moments, these choices create small pockets of healthier relating that can gradually shift norms. The emotional truth beneath all of this is both challenging and hopeful. Dating has become more confusing because technology has created new behaviors that exploit psychological vulnerabilities. The need for closure, the addiction to intermittent reinforcement, the hope that digital breadcrumbs mean something real. Ghosting, orbiting, and hollow micromances aren't evidence that connection is dead or that people are fundamentally worse than previous generations. They're evidence that humans are struggling to adapt relationship behaviors to technological contexts that didn't exist until very recently. The adaptation is messy and often painful, but adaptation is happening. More people are learning these terms, recognizing these patterns, setting boundaries, and refusing to accept ambiguous situations as normal. The fact that these behaviors now have names means they're being identified and discussed rather than suffered in isolated confusion. And that collective awareness is the first step toward creating different norms. This doesn't mean modern dating will suddenly become easy or that these trends will disappear. It means that understanding them clearly, protecting well-being through boundaries, and choosing consistently to show up with emotional honesty gradually builds immunity to the worst effects. Someone who knows what orbiting is can mute the orbiter instead of checking obsessively whether they viewed the latest story. Someone who understands micromance patterns can recognize when tiny gestures aren't leading anywhere and can choose to invest elsewhere. Someone who's been ghosted multiple times can decide that anyone who disappears without explanation has disqualified themselves regardless of how promising things seemed. These aren't defensive or cynical positions. They're informed boundaries based on pattern recognition that protect the capacity for genuine connection when it actually appears. Because real connection still exists, it just requires learning to recognize and walk away from the counterfeits. The ghosts who won't commit to absence or presence. The orbiters who want attention without effort. The micro-romances that offer intensity without depth. Real connection looks like consistency, clear communication, mutual investment, and willingness to be vulnerable and direct even when it's uncomfortable. It looks like someone who shows up not just digitally but physically, who makes concrete plans and keeps them, who navigates conflict through conversation rather than disappearance. These people still exist. Finding them just requires developing the skill of recognizing low-effort patterns quickly and redirecting energy before too much gets invested in situations that were never going to provide what's actually needed. That skill, pattern recognition plus boundary enforcement, is the real survival tool for modern dating. Not cynicism, not emotional walls, not giving up on connection entirely, just clear-eyed recognition of what behaviors signal genuine interest versus what behaviors signal someone who wants access without accountability, and the willingness to choose differently over and over until the pattern changes and real connection finally has space to develop.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.